What About Vietnam? A podcast with Gary Newsom. The series where Curry talks with travellers about their experiences and adventures. Find out more about Vietnam from the people who have actually been there.
What about Vietnam?
Whether it's adventure, exploring the culture and cuisine, shopping, or just soaking up the sun. Let Carrie and her travellers pave the way for a magical holiday in Vietnam.
What about Vietnam?
Xin chào and welcome to What About Vietnam. Our subject today is river cruising in Vietnam. So before you jump into cruising being one of the words in that description and maybe reference it to ocean cruising, we're definitely not going to be talking about anything that resembles ocean cruising. We're talking about river cruising and river cruising up the mighty Mekong or down the mighty Mekong, as in the case with my guest, Charlotte Pinder, as she's going to reference her trip from Cambodia down the Mekong to Ho Chi Minh City. She's done several cruises with the Pinder group and raves about them. She's done them also in other countries. So I think you're going to get some insights into river cruising that you just can't get anywhere else. She is a seasoned traveller. She's even, she's worked abroad, Germany, Japan, China, Hong Kong, UK. She's got a professional background in marketing, working for companies such as Procter & Gamble, Pepsi Cola, Reckitt and Coleman. Her focus has been in Latin America and East Asia, and she's travelled quite extensively through Vietnam apart from cruising. She has a great interest in the Cham civilization, and that was spurred on from her visit to Angkor Wat in Cambodia. If you're considering Vietnam and you've been looking at cruises and you're not sure whether it's your thing, this is the episode for you, because you're going to get all the nuts and bolts of it. You're going to get a better understanding of what to expect, the value that you're going to get, and certainly the kind of service that you can come to expect with the Pinder group in particular. And I think, or the plan is to give you everything you need to make a really well-informed decision, as I think river cruising is a great experience.
Charlotte, welcome to What About Vietnam?
Thank you, Kerry.
Look, Charlotte, we're going to be talking about cruising in Vietnam. And I know when we got together originally, we decided, is that the right term, calling it cruising? Because some people kind of think about cruising as just generally ocean cruising. But I think we've kind of agreed that it is river cruising. So tell us, how did you come to do a river cruise in Vietnam in the very first place?
I had friends whom I met in India who said, if you ever want to travel in Asia in a different way from the run-of-the-mill trips, package trips and so on, if you ever want to do something really unusual, then there is this company, Pinder, which you should give a try. It runs small cruising ships. They're not really cruisers in the sense of massive ocean-going liners, as you said, but they are small, bespoke boats, almost like a special little experience. Sorry, that didn't come out very well, did it?
No, it came out perfectly, because when I get asked to describe the cruise ship, so to speak, it's quite an ornate or older style. You kind of swear that you're sort of in, on a boat that's kind of a mini Raffles that is that has got that kind of old worldy feel to it, but with all the mod cons, doesn't it?
It's more like a boutique hotel experience is what I'd describe it as. It's smaller than the norm, and it's more elegant than the norm. It is, in a way, a little bit like walking back into an Agatha Christie movie.
Yes.
It looks like a period boat. It's not ultra modern. It is charming, beautifully decorated. The cabins are absolutely luscious, decked out as if they were marine craft themselves, with wooden panel walls and blue bed covers. It has a real nautical feel to it.
Yes, and I think in changing people's headsets about the actual ship, it's important to get that description down pat, because the experience is an old world experience, in my opinion, and I think you and I got on the same page as that. And I think the fact that the boat will only hold, I think I checked, around about 35, 40 people at the max, which is a vast difference to a major ocean liner. So you get that kind of very, would you say, personable experience on the boat?
It's much more an individual experience. This isn't about jumping off the back of a boat and doing snorkeling trips in the deep ocean. This is about slowly meandering down quiet little waterways. Very often the boat is almost completely silent as people just sit and stare out over the riverbanks, looking at the little villages that we're passing by. I think it's unlikely that you would encounter 35 people on one of the trips, because quite a lot of the people who go on these trips are single. And therefore, you will find normally it's somewhere between, 20 and 35. It's a very small, intimate experience as a result of that.
Absolutely. So one of the trips I know you and I talked about was the trip from Ho Chi Minh City up to Angkor Wat in Cambodia. And it's quite a famous trip that the Pinder cruise line does, and very, very popular. So can you talk to us about that experience from the get-go, from the absolute start? So I'm arriving into Ho Chi Minh City. How does it all roll from there?
Well, I've actually done the trip the other way round. Does it matter if I describe the other direction?
No.
Because one of my lifelong loves is Cambodia and Cambodian art. So I've often found myself in Siem Reap to see Angkor Wat, with no other destination in mind. But on one particular trip, I decided to add on, I think it was a week then, or maybe 10 days, traveling from Siem Reap down the river to Ho Chi Minh City. And really my interest was seeing what lay on the Cambodian side of the border rather than necessarily where I was going to end up. But actually, it was such a charming trip. It was my very first trip with Pinder. And it's one that's fueled my desire to go on as many trips as I possibly can with that company. Because the countryside is so wonderful from a boat. I've always traveled by road in Vietnam and in Cambodia beforehand, but the view from a boat is quite different. It's much more rural, much more focused on the people and the lifestyle in the villages that one's passing. And it sometimes feels a little unplanned. It feels as if something interesting is happening on the bank, the captain will just stop and we're able to get off and have a look. So it takes you through some very different kinds of countryside that you wouldn't necessarily get to see on a land trip. The things that stood out for me on that trip were, well, there are many of them actually, but I remember stopping in a little village and going to a very, very small temple with people bringing flowers and chatting to one another. A very different experience from going into a big city and doing the same kind of sightseeing. We then floated down the river to various towns where we were able to get off and go into markets. For some people, that's the highlight of their journey, going to see these exotic fruits and vegetables that are being hawked and with vendors in little conical hats on the riverbank, selling their wares. That's a great experience. I particularly enjoyed going to the village where Marguerite Duras, the French writer who was famous for her book, The Lover, where she had spent some time. And I was quite surprised to find that was directly on the riverbank. The other thing which I remember very distinctly was stopping at a fish farm. I'd never really been off the boat in a fish farm area, and I had no idea what to expect. But fascinating to experience the lives of people who basically live on water their entire lifetime and feel much more at home on a wooden plank in the middle of a fast flowing river than they do on land when they go to sell their wares. For anybody even remotely interested in rivers and oceans, going to see a fish farm is a very novel and interesting experience.
Yes, I'm nodding. My small experience on fish farming was actually in Mai Chau, where there is a massive reservoir there, and they have a fish farm. And I've since heard that they've built a seafood restaurant attached to it now, so you can imagine how fresh that fish is. But yes, it is a wonderful experience, and I think the ship to shore excursions are a big part of your journey. I mean, the mighty Mekong is a teeming place of activity, isn't it? Like there are all different kinds of freight being transported up this river and down this river, and I think the chance that you've just described to be able to, have the captain decide to pull in somewhere when something is interesting, that's magical. That's really amazing. I haven't had that experience, so that's really. But I love the children too, don't you? When you get off the boat, when you meet the that they're all waiting there.
They particularly like the tourists. They like to
Yes.
meet people from other cultures, and I've seen some very fine experiences along the way. Little kids who just literally want to try out 2 or 3 words of English. It's really charming. Very often, I don't think on this particular trip, but very often Pinder will make a special effort to visit, say, a primary school. I've done that a number of times with Pinder on other trips, which is, again, a quite remarkable experience and one from which both sides benefit, both the visitors and the children themselves.
Yes, exactly. And another part that I enjoyed was actually seeing some of the craft making, mats being woven and things like that. But and like candy being made and things like that. Did you have any experiences like that?
I have in Vietnam, but not on the Siem Reap to Ho Chi Minh City trip. I have also done the Red River experience in the north of Vietnam. In fact, that was much more recently than the Mekong trip. And on that trip, which takes visitors out of Hanoi and towards the coast, I remember quite distinctly we stopped at a conical hat making factory. If I say factory, it really means 3 ladies sitting around weaving baskets, basically. I had no idea the amount of work that goes into a conical hat, and I still have one in my living room here, which I brought all the way back from Vietnam because I was in such awe of the remarkable skill that is required to produce one of those. We did also stop on that trip in a brass making factory. Again, factory used very loosely there. And workshops where they were producing things like clay figurines, decorated pots, lacquerware, a lot of different activities going on in these little villages.
Yeah, and it's a rich experience, isn't it? Because, most tourists would end up seeing some of this stuff in local markets, etc., and walk right past them and quite dismiss them quite easily as something that, is made, I don't know, in China or something like that. But when you actually see the real McCoy that's made in a factory, in a local environment, and you see the work that those women put into it, it does really blow you away, doesn't it? That those crafts are still happening, that they're still, operating to the level they are.
I remember the level of astonishment amongst our group when we stopped on the way between Hanoi and the coast to watch somebody making noodles. And
Oh, yeah.
nobody had ever considered how noodles are produced. And there we saw them hanging in great loops over what looked like a laundry washing line, hanging out to dry. And we were fortunate enough to see the whole experience. It's a little difficult to describe for this podcast, but suffice to say that one man with very deft hands can produce hundreds of kilos of noodles from just some raw pastry or paste, to the astonishment of everybody who watches such an experience. I'll never, ever forget that, and I'm sure nobody else would have done who saw it.
No, and noodles, is an interesting subject because it comes up quite a bit when I talk to any Vietnamese chefs or I talk to people about cooking classes and things like that, because, noodles aren't noodles like we kind of think of them from a very, I guess, Italian perspective. They're very light, and I've since learnt that they are largely made from rice flour rather than wheat flour.
That's right.
So, from a gastrointestinal point of view, they are possibly lighter for us and easier for us to digest. So, there's a good bit of trivia to add in on the trip. Tell us, Charlotte, a little bit more, back on the boat. Something that I thought when I first did the trip was that 7 to 10 days on a boat or a river cruise, that might be a long time in a confined space. Can you talk to us a little bit about just how the boat runs? Like, in a day, what would be a normal day on the boat? And it doesn't matter if it's the Red River one or the other one that you did up to Angkor Wat.
Well, the day does, it has to be said, run around either the excursion programs or meal times, all of which are very enjoyable, of course. But on some days, there are lengthy stretches between the meals and between the riverside excursions. And on those days, you will find that there is a program, not compulsory by any means, which might cover such things as Vietnamese food or how to wear a local form of dress or some kind of art form, which may not have been known before to the people on the trip. I've particularly enjoyed the cookery classes. Again, not compulsory. And the history classes. If you're going on a trip like this, it really brings things to life to learn a bit more about the background of the country and its history. So there are small mini lectures, if you like, maybe an hour long or 2 hours in some cases, to fill in the day if you wish to join them. And if you don't, then there are beautiful lounger chairs and you can put your feet up with a nice book and a cocktail and just watch the world go by.
Yes, and that's the nice thing about the cabins. The cabins all have nice balconies so that you can either, as you say, you can choose to sit alone and look out at the view and the changing scenery, because I found the scenery as you went into different parts change quite dramatically. It was remarkable that it was one river. Well, for my case, it was the Mekong all the way to Siem Reap, and yet along the way the the changes were quite dramatic and at different times of the day.
Definitely. I mean, the morning times are very hustly and bustly because people are on their way to the market, or in some cases on the way to school or on the way to work. But there's a lot of activity. That slows down towards the end of the day.
Yes. That's that
And then the
sundowner.
amount of traffic on the waterways changes with that amount of activity. You're absolutely right.
And on the boat or on the cruise ship, I don't know, I'm still having a hard time deciding what we call it, but on the river boat, talk to us a little bit about the food, because I think that's an important factor to consider, and because I was really impressed.
Well, what you actually get in terms of food will depend on which chef you happen to have on board, and each chef has his own speciality. But I have to say that the trip that I did from Siem Reap to Ho Chi Minh City was a real culinary highlight for me. I discovered a dish I wasn't familiar with, to which I have since become addicted, which was hot and sour soup. Um, the taste is exactly what the name says. It's hot in terms of spicy and sour at the same time. Two tastes which are really typical of food of that region. But somehow the chef had melded, fused different aromas and flavors together to create a real masterpiece. And I did, before I left the boat, go down to the kitchen and beg to have a copy of the recipe. Of course, there are no recipes. The chef doesn't have a recipe book. He knows how to make this. And he tried in vain to impart the same skills to me as he has. I would say that was an absolute highlight. There are, of course, some people who come on the boats and don't want to try local food. It's not obligatory. And the chef will always produce something in a more Western style if that's what you wish to eat. But I have to say, eating the local food is part of the experience and something which I really look forward to and have enjoyed tremendously on these trips.
And I think that was another factor for me, was the food, because I didn't feel I was in that mass production kind of situation where it's, the massively produced buffet, the old buffet where they just, put it out in the heated bowls, etc. I felt like every dish was well thought out. I thought there was a really good variety. And as you say, if you didn't want to eat anything that wasn't Western or anything that, you could ask, and they simply would bend over backwards to accommodate whatever dietary, problems or issues that you had, to make sure that you had something tasty at each meal.
You've hit the nail on the head there, because one of the things which makes Pinder really exceptional is that they truly want every customer, every visitor to come away very happy indeed with every part of the experience. And if there is anything they can do, if there's any special request you have, they will try their best to fulfill that. And if that is in the form of a particular kind of food or a particular meal, someone will try their best to accommodate you in that regard. With regard to buffets, that's not really what the experience is at meal times. The lunch times tend to be stunning salads, and admittedly laid out at buffet style, but not huge numbers of them.
Exactly.
It's a very small experience. So it's a small countertop with the most delicious salads you could possibly imagine. Some things cooked hot. In some of the country trips I've been on, it's involved crispy noodles or crispy tempura style vegetables in batter, which come straight from the kitchen. I mean, these are sizzling hot. This is not a buffet that's been sitting around for a long time, not by any means. The salads are as if they've just been tossed. And then you can serve yourself with those, and then later on with whatever is hot from the buffet that day. In the evenings, there's a much more formal dining experience
Yes.
where a plated dish is brought to you at your table, and that's a really fine experience. But again, intimate, because you can eat what you want, not what's forced upon you. If you don't like what's being offered, there's always the flexibility to go and ask for what you do wish to have. I was on a trip with some Americans who only wanted to eat spaghetti bolognese and burgers, and that was accommodated with not a flinch or a blink of an eye about it. If that's what people wanted, that's what they received. But I have to say, if you don't try the local food, you're really missing out, because it is superb.
I agree. I agree. And even if you only just try it, just to sample
Absolutely.
it,
Yes.
I think, make your decision then, because, the flavors of Vietnamese food are quite unique, yet because, Vietnam sits in Southeast Asia, sometimes it gets, bandied with all Asian food, and it's not. It's really not. It's not like Thai. It's not.
No, not at
It's
all.
it's very unique in its flavors, and it's very delicate in its flavors. And I think, you owe it to yourself, if you're going to a country like Vietnam, is to at least sample some of the food. You might be surprised.
One of
Charlotte.
the delights of Vietnamese food is, of course, that it's heavily influenced by the French
Mm.
colonization of Southeast Asia. And so you will find, to your surprise, that the croissants and the baguettes are some of the best in the entire world. And
Oh,
they have
yeah.
built local dishes along those flavors and tastes. There's even a kind of stuffed baguette, a banh mi, I think the Vietnamese call
That's
it,
correct.
which is
Oh,
a
to die
local
for.
dish. It is a local dish, but it is wonderful. They have taken something French and given it a twist, which makes it irresistible.
Because it has pate in it. Uh, and, you can get banh mi. It's one of the first things that I die for when I get to Vietnam. Is the baguettes are just simply fantastic. I never feel like I'm full when I eat one. But then the actual banh mi itself is so loaded with such beautiful, tantalizing flavors, with the pate and the pork and the fresh coriander and things like that. It's just, yeah, it's to die for.
One of the other specialities of Vietnamese cuisine is spring rolls, but not spring rolls as your listeners probably know them, not deep fried Chinese style spring rolls, but Vietnamese spring rolls, which
Fresh.
are fresh vegetables, shredded vegetables, and maybe prawns or whatever else you want to put into them, because very often you can make your own, wrapped up into a flexible rice paper. It's a sheet of rice paper, really, in a circle, which you can roll and make into an absolutely stunning piece of handheld food. Delicious in its own right. But the interesting thing was, the day after we learnt to assemble them, we were taken to, again, what they call a factory, but is nothing of the sort, which was ladies making these rice paper circles on a local fire by their homes on the riverside, and then hanging them up on bamboo, a sort of bamboo contraption to dry them off, which gives them their distinctive patterning. What an experience to see the food, make the food, eat the food, and watch someone else making the ingredients. Fabulous.
Yeah, and when they make those circles to make those round wrappers, but you think, oh gosh, that looks pretty easy. I should be able to do that. Not so
Not
easy.
at all. But part of the experience, and it's just fascinating.
It is. It is.
It's small things like that which make these trips so special.
I think so too. Talk to us a little bit, Charlotte, about your typical traveller on the cruises that you've been.
I've done 7 trips with Pinder in various different countries, and I cannot tell you honestly that there is a typical traveller. On the latest trip I did in the delta, the Irrawaddy Delta, just south of, in the south of Myanmar, south of Yangon, there were four youngsters in their late 20s, maybe. But that there can also be people in their 80s. I can remember quite distinctly a very sprightly pair of ladies in their late 80s, fit, jolly, having a wonderful time. There is really no specific profile to travelers, apart from one thing, which is that families tend to choose the family trip option. There are, at certain times of the year, cruises which are labelled as good for people with children. I would say that there were no children on any of the trips which I undertook. To be frank, I think children would find this a very tame experience if they're used to big cities. As for the adults, any age group, any nationality, I've met them all on these trips.
And you mentioned that a lot of single people. I mean, I've travelled alone on these trips, and I know you have. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I felt totally safe and happy to do that. You the same?
I do all my travelling on my own. I find I don't get so close to the local culture and history and the people themselves if I'm with someone else. So every single Pandora trip that I've done has been on my own. It's an amazing experience to have a cabin to yourself and to be able to meet other people on board. You would never be lonely. There is always someone to talk to. And for the most part, everybody I've met on these trips has been someone with a particular fascination or interest, which makes them a good dinner companion and a good traveling companion. As for security, there's no issue whatsoever about security. It's totally safe. I would say that most, if not all, Southeast Asia is perfectly safe for single travelers and for single females. I've never had any difficulty whatsoever during 40 years of traveling through Southeast Asia.
Well, you can't get any better recommendation than that. I mean, I've only been travelling in this particular region for the last 14 years, but most of the time on my own. And funnily enough, traveling on your own, sometimes I think you meet more people if you travel on your own. I think if you travel with a partner or whatever, or your own group, you tend to stick within your own group. Where if you're on your own, not that people take pity on you, so to speak, but people will be more open to say hello, and you're more open to reach out. What do you think?
I think on the rare occasions, and I do mean rare, it's not very often that people come in a group, but on the rare occasions when people have arrived in a group, they've had a less interesting experience than those who are happy to be seated anywhere at a dinner table, or on a bus or wherever, or in rickshaws with someone else, because they tend to speak about things they already know. They already know each other and they reinforce their own lifestyle. Whereas going onto a boat as a single person, the dining tends to be communal. That is, tables of 6, 8, 10, 12, whatever, and you just join whichever table you wish to join. And I try really hard to sit at a different table every evening so that I meet as many people as possible. It's not, never have I ever felt someone felt sorry for me traveling on my own. And in fact, many people on some of the trips which I've traveled on have been traveling on their own. It is much more likely that you will see and experience something fabulous if you're with people who are doing the trip with you for the first time and don't know each other. In fact, if you are a single traveller, occasionally Pinder will run trips which have a special rate for a single traveller occupying a double cabin for themselves. So that's something to look out for. It makes it an affordable way to travel. Pinder is very flexible in that way and provides many opportunities for the single traveller to have a fabulous trip in the same way as a couple or a group would.
So, this is a good segue into the pricing of river cruising in Vietnam. I mean, how would you describe it? You've done a lot of travel and lots of different kinds of experience. How would you say that the cost to benefit ratio kind of thing? Do you think it's good value?
I think it's exceptional value, not just good value. The quality of the experience is exceptionally high, and yet the price is, to my mind, pretty reasonable for a very intimate and exclusive experience. The cabins are lovely. The food is exceptional on every trip I've been on. The quality of the excursions is better than anything I've experienced in the past. Very carefully planned. The way in which you travel in a leisurely fashion down the river, that's irreplaceable. I think the prices are actually very reasonable indeed to reflect that. And if, as I say, as a single person, if you go on one of the weeks when single travellers are priced slightly differently from the norm, it's, again, a really good deal.
Yeah, that was my thoughts exactly. And I think when you do weigh up the experience in its entirety, the actual miles that you are covering, as in distance-wise, I mean, getting around Vietnam has all forms of transport, but going by river is a totally unique experience. So you can't mimic it by land or bus or any other way. It is truly unique, and I think that has to be taken into consideration. Charlotte, I want to just finish up our episode. It's been really good to talk about cruising in this way and give everyone that's listening a really good sense of what it is like to travel this way and experience the country. As you've done, did you say 7 trips? 7 trips with Pinder?
7 different
Wow.
itineraries, yes.
Wow. So I'm going to put you up there as definitely knowing what you're talking about. But look, just to finish up, I'm doing this thing this year on my series where I'm asking people for a word that describes travel and what it means to them now and in the future. I mean, you're sitting in Portugal, I'm sitting in Australia. Both of us can't go anywhere, but we both love travel.
Yes.
I have a word, and I'm going to tell you my word, but if I may, can I ask a word? It can be 2 words if you have to, but just a word to describe what travel means to you.
Immersion.
Immersion. What a great word.
Immersion in the culture, the history, the lifestyle of these countries in a way that you possibly can't do in a vehicle on land.
Gosh, I didn't think I'd be stuck for words, but that is such a great word. I'm really impressed, and I think it speaks to the type of travel we've spent the last 30 minutes talking about, and I think maybe even sits nicely next to my word. My word is revive, and my word is driving me in what I'm doing with the podcast, in the sense that I want to revive people's travel inspiration. I want to revive their love of discovery and immersion, and the chance to experience new cultures, as you say, try new food, meet new people, and travel the world in different ways. And we've just spent today talking about river cruising. So, reviving the interest in cruising is important, because I think cruising as a word has kind of got tarnished due to the COVID pandemic and a lot of media that has abounded. And I think it just doesn't relate to river cruising and what we've been talking about. So important to have you on to talk about it in such a positive way and share your positive experiences.
I'm sorry, the word cruising really doesn't capture the experience on one of these boats. This is laid back, slowly meandering down riverways. It's experienced a lifestyle that would be otherwise unattainable, that of the daily routine of little villages, little towns. It's cruising gives entirely the wrong impression. I think we've said this all the way through the podcast. It's not a true reflection of the lovely way in which you are able to travel on one of these ships. And when I said immersion, I meant being able to get off a boat, suddenly find yourself in a rice paddy field where local people are performing a dance or in one case we went to a water puppet show in a village, which would have been totally inaccessible from a major city. I'm not even sure you could get there by road. A water puppet experience far better than any I've ever seen in a theatre in Hanoi, let's say, out in the open air with a lot of people who are desperately interested in getting to know this culture. That's a money can't buy experience. I really believe that. And cruising makes it sound rather ordinary. I promise you there's nothing ordinary about these trips.
I think, Charlotte, don't say anything else. I think you kind of wrapped it up. Really lovely to speak to you, and thank you for sharing your experiences with us today.
No, thank you, Kerry. Your inspiration for these series that I understand you're doing is superb. It will help people to plan their trips in a way they couldn't otherwise, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. Check out the episode notes for more information.
What about Vietnam?
Don't forget to subscribe, rate and review, and stay tuned for more fun adventures in Vietnam.
What about Vietnam?